speech.
During my travels in recent days, I have found new reasons for hope. I have just concluded a visit to Saudi Arabia, where yesterday I met with King Salman and with the leaders from across the Muslim and Arab world. In that visit, we reached historic agreements to pursue greater and greater cooperation in the fight against terrorism and its evil ideology.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, traveling with the president, joins us live from Jerusalem, where the president is set to speak any moment. John, is there any sense that the president's visit and meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu is colored by the controversy over Mr. Trump's White House meeting with Russian officials, where he shared intelligence that some reports say was classified and connected to Israel?
Well, that question has been asked and answered just in recent minutes. You go back to that meeting that the president had with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He shared some intelligence that apparently part of the threat assessment had been developed by Israel. And there were some folks here in Israel that weren't too happy about that. But it was one of those unscripted moments in what's called a pool spray. As the president was sitting down with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, somebody shouted a question about that. The Prime Minister came back and said that the intelligence sharing partnership between the United States and Israel is just fine. The press was then shooed out of the room, but the president decided he wanted to say something about it all. So watch what happened here.
I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had another story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
Now, the president claims that he never mentioned the word Israel during that conversation, but it was never reported that he brought up the source of the intelligence. It was only later discovered that part of that threat assessment did come from Israel. The president having dinner right now, he and the First Lady with Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife Sarah. Earlier today, you mentioned he became the first sitting president to ever visit the Western Wall, which is just behind us here from our live location. He also visited the holiest site in the Christian faith as well, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The president's visit here, and the reason for it, really twofold. First of all, to reaffirm the unshakable bond between the United States and Israel, made ever more important by the fact that the president just signed a $110 billion arms agreement with Saudi Arabia, and also trying to put some of the bricks and mortar in place to potentially craft a Middle East peace deal. And the president yesterday in Saudi Arabia, and he mentioned it again today, believes that that possibility is even closer because of the shared threat in the Arab world and here in Israel from Iran. Listen to what the president said a short time ago.
Today we have so many incredible opportunities before us, and my hope for this visit is that we seize every single one of them. I am thrilled to be here on behalf of the American people. I know Israel and America share the same goals, and I have great confidence that we can achieve tremendous success together.
Now, much of the Arab world shares the same fears that Israel does, that Iran represents an existential threat to much of the Arab world, the same way that they feel about it here in Israel. The president wrapped all of that together in a speech that he gave to the Arab Islamic American Summit yesterday in Saudi Arabia, in which he implored the Arab world and Muslim nations around the world really to rally together in the fight against terrorism. Here's what the president said during that speech.
Until the Iranian regime is willing to be a partner for peace, all nations of conscience must work together to isolate Iran, deny it. Funding for terrorism cannot do it. And pray for the day when the Iranian people have the just and righteous government they so richly deserve.
So between yesterday and today, what the president is hoping to do, Sandra, is create a coalition to fight terrorism and then at the same time use that new spirit of cooperation to try to forge an Arab-Israeli peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. He calls that sort of, the mother of all deals. and it's one that he would like to put his signature to, no question about that. Sandra?
John, I had a chance to speak with General Jack Keane as the president embarked on this trip, and he said, quote, there has not been a president since World War II that's facing the challenges that this president is facing. As we await the president's remarks in Jerusalem, the stakes are obviously very high. Can you give us some sense of just how high the expectations are, for example, for the speech the president is about to make?
Well, I think, it's all about optics. It's all about sending signals. I mean, nobody believes that in the next few weeks or even months, the president is going to put together a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We've got to urge caution here. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because all the same arguments that have existed for decades continue to exist. Israel does not want to go back to the 1967 borders, as the Palestinian Authority and the Arab world is demanding. It wants to have Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. The Palestinians want the eastern part of Jerusalem. So there's still a lot of thorny issues there that will be very, very difficult to work out. So it's kind of lowering expectations, but at the same time sort of dreaming about what is possible here. And that's what the president did yesterday in his speech in Saudi Arabia. That's what he'll do here again, is sort of lay down this idea that if we work together in common purpose against, for shared goals and against a common enemy, that being terrorism and the threat from Iran. The president does hope that at some point maybe Iran can come down from the terroristic heights that it seems to have been at for so long, that a lot of things are possible. So it's kind of draining the swamp of terrorism and getting countries on the path to prosperity. Human rights will obviously be a part of that, though further down the road. So it's really kind of lowering the expectations game, but setting goals. Sandra?
All right, well said. All right, we are awaiting the president. John Roberts, thank you. The president will be making remarks shortly in Jerusalem alongside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Will take you there live when it begins. All right, meanwhile, just so much reaction to the president's very strong, very sobering speech in Saudi Arabia on fighting terrorism. Mr. Trump calling on Muslims to purge, quote, foot soldiers of evil from their societies. Some criticizing the president for not talking more about human rights while in Saudi Arabia, a country that hardly has the best record on that front.
The promotion of democracy, the promotion of human rights is going to take a back seat. I think that would be a terrible abdication of our global leadership when it comes to advocating for people who are the subject of persecution or imprisoned, or journalists that are thrown in jail, or people not allowed to practice their faith. I think it would be a historic mistake for us to walk away from that.
But Secretary of State Rex Tillerson defending the president's approach, saying terrorism itself is a big obstacle for human rights.
I think the way you address those human rights issues and women's rights issues is to improve the conditions in the region. And today, conditions in the region are under a lot of stress because of the threat of terrorism. If we do not defeat Daesh, if we do not defeat these forces of evil, there will be no conditions under which we can even hope to improve human rights for all the people in the region.
And former head of the House Intel Committee, Republican Peter King, with high praise for the speech, drawing a sharp contrast between Mr. Trump and his predecessor.
This was an historic speech. It was so different from everything that President Obama has said and done over the previous 8 years. There were no apologies. There was no political correctness. There was no happy talk. He drew the lines. This is good and evil. You have to drive them out. Their souls will be condemned. He called for unity of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. This, to me, was such a profound speech, and it's spoken right in the heart of Islam. To me, again, it's a turning point in American history. It's a turning point in American diplomacy. President Trump today established himself, I believe, as a true leader on the world stage.
All right, we are awaiting the president's remarks. Meanwhile, Juan, what do you make of the president's visit so far, that speech? Is he seizing on the opportunity that is there?
Oh, sure. And did you catch the sword dance?
Yes.
That was something, huh?
Yes.
I mean, the question is, you see the sword dance, and it's just so theatrical, so incredible, because no president previously had ever done it. Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, also participated. And it raises a question that goes to the heart of the American view of what the president said yesterday in Saudi Arabia, that, yes, we have to do business with Saudi Arabia. We've done arms deals with them. Yes, they stand against Iran, and you know the divide between Sunni and Shia. And we are clear that we do not like the fact that the Iranians subsidize so much terrorism in the Middle East. But at what point do you say, wait a second, you know what, we can't buy into a lot of the human rights violations that the Saudis have perpetrated. We don't buy into 9/11. I think it was 15 of the 19 9/11 attackers were Saudis.
17.
17. We don't buy into the madrasas that preach hatred of not only Jews but Christians in some cases and other Islamic sects. And clearly the women's issue, one that the president's wife tried to address. These are major issues. The president didn't say a word. So we are invested in his fight against terrorism without reserve. And we're glad that he was there to say that. But at some point, do you engage the Saudi culture with the sword dance and other ways by not addressing what is, you know, to my mind, the elephant in the room?
Did President Obama engage it by bowing?
No, he didn't bow. What he did was he engaged by saying, we have to do business with you. I'll respect you.
Picture?
No, bowing. Look, President Bush held hands. No. I'm telling you, I think there's a huge difference between saying we're going to have some relationship, Harris, hold hands, to pay respects, whatever culture, Asian or Arab.
But Juan, I agree with you. I think there was some opportunity for the president to address human rights and stand up for freedom. Absolutely. But you know what? It's so hypocritical for Democrats to give the president a hard time when they give President Obama a pass, and they don't really raise an issue with Hillary Clinton taking tens of millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia for the Clinton Foundation, when clearly Saudi Arabia constantly violates two of the main bases of the Democratic Party. And so a lot of that hypocrisy I don't find sits very well. What I do think is interesting about this trip to Saudi Arabia is that arms deal, because it's not necessarily going to fight ISIS. You know, Saudi Arabia is in a contentious war right now with Yemen. And, you know, how is that going to affect
by proxy on the ground,
their human rights?
Do we have a measurable way of finding out that those weapons are not going to end up in the ground in Yemen? One other quick point. You know, one of the people that President Trump met with this morning was the president of Israel, Rivlin. And I thought this was so key. Rivlin said, Israel appreciates America's leadership and of your administration in the action you took in Syria. There are red lines, Syria, that must never be crossed. It is interesting to me. That is, in a way, acknowledging somewhat the weakness and the failures of the last administration and moving forward without boldly saying it. I think Kennedy brings up a good point. You can't go forward, obviously, without acknowledging some of the things that are going on. But some of these things started before President Trump even thought about stepping into office.
Megan?
I mean, I think no matter what the criticism is of him speaking about human rights, which I, of course, would have loved had that been integrated as well, just talking about Islamic extremism, talking about terrorism, going over there. This is the fastest any sitting president in modern times has gone to Israel since being elected. In the first 120 days, he's already coming over there, meeting with the prime minister. The question of whether or not we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem is still something that is very important to me. I think it's very important to a lot of pro-Israel Republicans. They seem to have hedged a little bit on moving it from Tel Aviv. It will be interesting. I'm looking forward to today, especially in the speech coming up, whether or not we're going to make any headway with that, because it was a big campaign promise. And again, he seems to have historically, maybe siding a little bit more with administrations past, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
I mean, there were some who were saying, Juan, that this trip was just too ambitious for the president to take on at this point in time. When you look at his predecessors taking it, they went to either Mexico or Canada in their first 100 days for their first foreign trips. But this is what he promised. Is this just not him further following up on what he promised those who voted for him, his supporters?
You mean he promised to go after a Middle East peace deal?
Absolutely. No, Middle East peace deal, but he is over there and his message is very strong on terrorism.
Oh, the singular focus on terrorism. I would agree, yeah, that he's singularly focused, and this is what he promised. The question is, can he deliver? And, you know, the deal, for example, the arms deal that he struck with the Saudis, is not that exceptional. The difference, to listen to Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, is we are doing deals as opposed to diplomacy, right? It's not just diplomacy. We are focused on bringing jobs home to America. This is the Trump administration explanation on what they're doing there in the Middle East. And again, it's just, of a concern to me. I don't think it's hypocritical. I think that Obama, for example, and I keep noticing that we keep coming back to Obama as if this is...
Well, he was the last president. It's only
but let me just tell you, this goes
and
beyond
the
that.
arms deal is a continuation from the Obama administration.
It sure does. And not only that, it's a continuation from the Bush administration. Bush did an arms deal. And remember, President Obama came into the Arab world in the aftermath of what had taken place in Iraq and what had gone on in Afghanistan, and a lot of questions about whether or not there was a legitimate reason to go into these regions and the difficult relations between the Arab world and the U.S. So I think we're dealing with different contexts, but I notice that people keep bringing up Obama like, oh, he's the non-Obama.
Because you can't deny that he brought his personal ideology and worldview into the way that he addressed everything in any context related to the Middle East. I go to his speech in Cairo. He was on a constant apology tour for the United States and our place in the world, which, by the way, is the number one reason, I think, other than the economy, why President Trump ended up getting elected, because he will say things like Islamic extremism on television. So I think many people, even just showing up in Saudi Arabia and saying those words, for people like me, it's a big success. I mean, President Obama wanted to apologize for everything America has done globally for the past 20 years. And it's just, even if President Trump hasn't been pitch perfect, it's certainly a refreshing change from the last 8 years.
And it's also a big deal for a sitting U.S. president to go to Saudi Arabia and say, this form of terrorism, this is your problem. This is not necessarily our problem. You guys have to figure that out. And that's something that we've talked about on the couch for a long time. You know, it's like, how do you change hearts and minds over there? And doesn't it make more sense that people who live in the Middle East are more actively engaged in somehow convincing people who fall into radical Islam to either get the hell out of there?
But don't you think that's what, so, you know, going back to Obama for a second, Obama was there at a moment, I think we all celebrate it now as the Arab Spring. Maybe we are a little naive as Americans about the global love for democratic principles, human rights, and the like. But it was seen then as an opportunity to see democratic leaders come in who would not be engaged with terrorism, like the Saudis who fund terrorism, sad to say.
But what came from the Arab Spring?
That's the question. At that time, I'm saying, historically, we were thinking things were going to open up. But then you look at things like the Muslim Brotherhood and others who took power under the Arab Spring, and you say, wow, maybe doesn't work for everybody. Huh?
All right. Well, it is the noon hour Eastern time. It is the 7 p.m. hour in Jerusalem. We continue to await the president's remarks alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu. We will bring you that as soon as it begins. President Trump in Israel earlier saying he is in search of what he calls the ultimate deal, a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. We await Mr. Trump's remarks in Jerusalem. Can he succeed where other presidents have failed for decades? We will debate that next.
And a front row seat to history together today. Fox News alert, we are waiting President Trump's remarks in Jerusalem as he kicks off the second leg of his overseas tour. You're looking live now at the Holy City, where the president will soon appear with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. President Trump is setting his sights high. We've been talking about it this hour. He's trying to reach what he's called the ultimate deal, a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. Something which, as you know, has eluded American presidents for decades. Upon his arrival at the airport in Tel Aviv, he said the time is right to make it happen.
We have before us a rare opportunity to bring security and stability and peace to this region and to its people, defeating terrorism and creating a future of harmony, prosperity, and peace. But we can only get there working together. There is no other way.
You know, I really want to start here as we wait for his remarks with Netanyahu as they come up. We'll, of course, take that event live. But I want to start here with the gravity of where we are right now. We haven't talked a lot about that. You know, the White House has put out a statement that this is the first president to visit holy sites of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions, faiths. And, you know, we don't spend enough time talking about the history making that's going on right now. Juan?
It's pretty incredible. I think we saw the president there holding his hand against the Western Wall, and the way he was touching it just looked so emotional for him. I don't know that he's a very religious man the way we think of him here at home, but it looked like he was having some thoughts there. But I mean, that is one of the great sites. And of course, the politics get involved there again. Israel says that's part of Israel, and the United States couldn't invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to join with the president because they didn't want to signal to the Arab world, to the Palestinians in specific, that they were taking Israel's side in this. But just to see him there. I think, again, when we think about history, very significant.
And when you think, Kennedy, about moving forward, I mean, how can you even posture any sort of peace plan if you don't go to the sites that are so sacred to each of those faiths? I think it's such an interesting and strong start.
Yeah, and it is interesting that, on his first foreign trip, he's really tackling and, in a momentous way, discussing the three major religions, not only in the Middle East, but on Earth. And, it really says something. It's interesting because we're seeing a new dynamic for him. And, people talk about he's not very comfortable in foreign policy, but this is a setting where there's been so much failure behind him and the expectations are so low. It actually puts him in a better position to talk with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And, of course, even Saudi Arabia, and these are, at least two of these three entities, are foes of Iran. So, if you can talk about faith and have respect for that faith and also talk about keeping Iran in check, those are some unifying factors. And if he can keep a gaffe-free trip, it will be a success, not only in getting Comey off the front page, but also show him in a foreign policy light that I think a lot of people haven't anticipated.
Well, I think what we are already hearing from you, Juan, is that you're already seeing this trip as a success. And I know that we spend a lot of time on the couch talking about the messaging coming out of this White House and the narrative coming out of this White House. And for everything that has been going on here at home and the headlines that have run the last couple of weeks, this trip, Megan, I'll bring you in, seems to be changing that, at least for now.
I want to juxtapose this with the fact that President Obama wouldn't even let Netanyahu speak in front of Congress. That's the kind of relationship he had with our greatest ally in the Middle East. And our pro-Israel Americans here in this country have been so deeply offended by President Obama's relationship and seeming, anger towards the Prime Minister of Israel for so long. Now we juxtapose this with President Trump, whose son-in-law is a close personal friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So to say that this is polar opposites isn't even doing it lightly. He's there with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, obviously two Jewish Americans as well. So it will be interesting to see their role in this, because as we've said before many times, I'm fascinated to know what Jared Kushner will do, because President Trump himself has said that this might be something that he could end up registering peace in the Middle East. It's certainly a high, lofty goal. Every administration has tried, every modern administration has tried to do this, has tried to gain peace in the Middle East. But if this goes well, and gaffe-free being the number one thing in this, Kennedy, then it will be a huge success and also optically and narratively reset in the way that I think this administration is right now.
One of the difficulties is, just so apparent as he lands there, already there's fighting going on, in the West Bank because of the settlement. So you have Israeli soldiers then using their modern technology.
Well, this president's been pretty terse and tough with Benjamin Netanyahu on that very. Remember them at the podium, at the double podium?
Good point.
And he let him know, the settlements. He spoke about it.
He asked him to delay the settlements, and obviously that puts pressure, political pressure at home on Netanyahu.
But that's already a visual difference, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I think it's a huge problem.
Why is it a problem?
Why is it a problem? You don't see it propelling this forward?
Well, no, because, in fact, one of the Israeli concerns about President Trump is he goes from Israel over to the Palestinian territories on Wednesday. And he is promising a two-state solution at a moment where Netanyahu at home does not have support for a two-state solution.
So, but the president also said, the president said publicly, it could be two-state, it could be one state. I'm open. He said
that when Netanyahu
he's a deal maker, but he's clearly trying to emphasize that you got to make a deal with the Palestinians.
For the prime minister to see this president try to make a deal, and as Kennedy's pointing out, you talk about it. I think it moves the ball forward because we're discussing it, and we're talking about it in a different way now. I mean, this is a president whom, just based on his recent actions, I don't think anybody takes lightly when he says he's going to try.
I'm just, for someone like me who's hyper pro-Israel, it's one of the factors that I vote on. This is such a refreshing change, even where for some of the faults that have happened, again, not bringing up human rights in Saudi Arabia, this really is such an incredible tone shift. And even if just this trip, him visiting and speaking with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that's already a huge leap forward from the past 8 years. And we have to give him credit where credit's due on this. And there's been a huge frustration for so many of us who are pro-Israel the last 8 years that we had a president who seemed to just have a complete and total adversarial relationship with Netanyahu. And no matter what happens, I think just the symbolism in and of itself is already a step forward.
Why was it adversarial?
He wouldn't let him speak.
About things like the settlements.
And
here's Trump saying the same thing Obama said about the settlement.
It is historically unprecedented not to let the Prime Minister of Israel, our greatest ally in the Middle East, to be able to speak in front of Congress, to not invite him to the White House. It happened for 8 years.
What do you mean he was in the White House? What are you talking about?
They shielded an already frostier relationship. I mean,
that I take, but come on, he's invited him to the White House repeatedly.
They had a notoriously adversarial relationship.
Yeah, and guess why? Netanyahu was doing things that did not advance what has been across the generations the American prescription for peace, a two-state solution.
This is optically the way that President Obama and many liberals see the world, and it is completely, as I said, juxtaposed with how President Trump and not only conservatives, but just pro-Israel Americans.
I think the president would love to see a bipartisan win. I think that, obviously, any president wants to bring peace between Palestine and Israel. But if the president could actually do this, I think one of the big incentives for him is that it would please Democrats, Republicans, Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans.
It would please the world. It would be one of the great accomplishments of all time.
Can you imagine anything more for this president?
We're watching this situation happen, and we're waiting for those cars in the distance on this left side of your screen to start moving so that we know that the president is moving on to his next spot. He's going to be meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the world to see now, with some quick remarks before they head to their next event. We've been talking a lot about words, and so I just want to utter some, and I go back to the Israeli President Rivlin, who said today, "Mr. President, we are happy to see that America is back. America is back again. You marked the defeating of ISIS as one of your top missions. This is the most important objective. Israel will do everything in its power in order to assist you in that mission." We haven't heard that kind of language. And you can talk about the semantics and the particulars of who met where and all that stuff. I mean, this texture of their relationship seems to be evolving before our very eyes. This is an important part in history.
And to keep setting up the president's words in just a few moments from now, when he landed at the airport there, he said he urged both sides to take advantage of the rare opportunity for peace during his administration. He has called this the ultimate deal. So to say expectations are pretty much high heading into this.
I mean, and the stakes are high too for all the reasons we've been talking about. We're going to continue on, and we're seeing a little bit of movement on that screen. So we're going to bring it to you live as these remarks come from our president and the Prime Minister of Israel. Stay close. You don't want to miss a second.
Jerusalem. He is currently meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is expected to step away and head to make remarks on possibly reaching a peace deal. Those remarks are expected any moment now. We will take them live when they begin. Stay tuned for that.
Fox News confirming former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn plans to plead the Fifth and decline a Senate Intelligence Committee subpoena for documents related to the Russia investigation. And more now on the Russia probe. House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz says he'll be talking with the fired FBI Director James Comey today, and that he wants records of the president's meeting with Comey. This as Mr. Comey is set to testify publicly for the first time before the Senate Intelligence Committee sometime after Memorial Day. Senators say they'll also push for Comey's memos and details on his meetings with the president. Watch.
Did he keep these memos? What did those memos say? Why did he write it? And how did he feel? Did he ever feel like he was being put in a position where he couldn't do his job? There's no doubt that that's the questions that are going to get asked and asked repeatedly, and the American people deserve to have an answer to that.
The big fact is, did the president fire Comey because of his investigation, and he was worried about what the investigation might conclude? That, if so, that borders on a very serious charge. So we need to flesh that out. We need to see what the response is, and it's got to come from Director Comey himself.
What? You know, Juan, I think no matter what side of the aisle you're on, left or right, it's going to be must-see TV with, FBI Director Comey testifying. What do you anticipate getting any new revelations out of him?
I don't see how you can't. And we're waiting on so much from Comey at this moment. You just heard Congressman Chaffetz say, we want to know, are these memos in existence? Where are they? Can we see them? And were they contemporaneous? We don't know. We have these reports that suggest that the president told Comey, can you let this go? What was the intent behind that? Because what you just heard from Senator Feinstein was the suggestion that you know, it could be that this is obstruction of justice, which is an impeachable offense, right? Or actually, anything's an impeachable offense if you're in the Senate. Your dad can make it up. But the idea is that we know obstruction of justice is there if, in fact, the president was intending to undercut this investigation.
Megan is too much of a lady to take you on your dad can make it up.
He's a senator.
not a lady.
No, he's a senator.
Yes,
that is ridiculous.
Yes,
and the underlying thought that somebody would actually do that.
Wait, he's a senator.
Just make it up?
No. Senators.
I know. Got it.
No, senators.
Let's move on.
The senators are the ones who interpret what it means when we say high crimes.
It has to get through the Congress, then it has to get.
This is what I'm curious about, because if they are in fact going to subpoena that memo and perhaps other memos, then how broad can the subjects be to reach into the memo jar? You know, can we go back on some of the notes that he took after he spoke with Loretta Lynch and her unprecedented conversation with the former president, whose wife was the subject of a criminal investigation, having a conversation on an airplane that was disclosed to no one, and the only way we found out about it is because there was a reporter who figured out the tail numbers on both planes and the fact that President Clinton happened to be there at the exact same time. Does James Comey have memos about that? What about some of the conversations? What about the discussions and decision making that led to giving Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills their immunity? I mean,
what is he doing with the memos? Is he holding them back for retaliation? Because if he really thought the president were obstructing a case, it is a crime that he didn't raise that as such at the time contemporaneously.
No.
Yeah, it's
to the contrary, it would have been a crime if he was grandstanding. Let's not let some of the Trump people, Comey, think that Trump's that Comey's a grandstander.
No. He had a responsibility to turn that memo over.
No, he did not.
And to raise the idea of there's a problem here.
I keep telling you no, and you keep talking to me like you don't want me to say it, but I'm going to tell you that what he did was to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation, keep contemporaneous notes. If he had come forward, it would have stopped the investigation.
You at least have to concede that there's a huge credibility problem with James Comey on both sides. And I have friends that are huge Trump supporters who said, well, what if James Comey, I don't know how he takes these notes. What if he created it? What if he made it up? I mean, there are a lot of questions about the credibility of this man, which, by the way, from the left and the right, this was bipartisan. So part of the problem is there's a total lack of distrust of James Comey just as a person to begin with. And there are so many things flying around everywhere that haven't been proven, anonymous sources everywhere, and I think everybody needs to take a breath and wait it out.
Yeah,
Sandra?
let's get to the truth, girl.
Well, look, the president's called this a witch hunt.
He has.
He has. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's extreme.
How is his messaging of this?
Well, it's one of these things where I certainly didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I would advise him if I was in the White House with Donald Trump, I'd say stop the tweeting, and that's how this came out, this witch hunt. Because you know what? It does not look good. I mean, obviously the critics then say, well, gee, I think President Kennedy was assassinated. Gee, guess what? Senator McCain said, you treated badly? You want to talk about someone who's treated badly?
But I think it's as simple as he needs to be like Ronald Reagan during Iran-Contra, not like Nixon during Watergate. Be the happy warrior, be as transparent as possible. This is a witch hunt. It's no big deal.
Where are the memos?
Positive Ronald Reagan, not like Nixon.
I just want to know where the memos were. And if James Comey really had a problem with something that the president asked him to do, why didn't he raise it then?
Because, again, there was an investigation going on.
It looks like this could go on for a while, but we've got this that we're waiting on. A speech by the president. He is currently Fox News alert as we await comments now coming up from our president and the Prime Minister of Israel. And so here's what we're watching on the left of your screen. They were due to meet and have, in fact, bites at a hotel, the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. And they are still meeting, as we're told. Then they will get into the vehicles that you see and be escorted to the next location, where we anticipate that there will be a short moment of comments from both gentlemen. So we are watching for that. This is history in the making. It's so important. The president, as many have in the past, saying that he can seize this moment, which he calls the right moment, to forge ahead with a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. He's trying to be the difference maker here, the deal maker. And so we're watching to see what happens next. We'll bring it to you live when it does.
You know what else people are watching? Meantime, First Lady Melania Trump stepping into a very high-profile role this week as she joins her husband on his first international trip since taking office. Mrs. Trump visited a school and met with female workers in Saudi Arabia over the weekend. Local news outlets had good things to say about her fashion choices, even as she opted not to wear a headscarf. This amid reports the First Lady is taking a bigger role behind the scenes, keeping a close eye on the media and what the press says about her husband. Article in Politico saying, quote, she has raised concerns that some on his communications and press team aren't doing enough to defend him, according to aides and sources close to the president. She's been especially troubled by background quotes in which West Wing aides criticize the president, and she's called the president to discuss it. A senior White House official strongly pushing back on that report, telling Fox News the First Lady is not pushing her husband to make changes in the White House press corps. All right, so Juan, I will start with you, darling. She's obviously his greatest asset when he travels overseas, and it's impossible for people not to have the pants charmed off of them when she shows up wearing delightful clothes.
Now, were you being cynical when you said pants charmed off of them in the Middle East? Because I think for Saudi women, that's a real question, right? She was wearing a dress or pants.
Mm-hmm. She had on a black pantsuit with a gorgeous thick gold belt. Why are we talking about her fashion?
Why? Because that's one of the key points that's being praised. In fact, Kennedy said it.
So do you think that she is orchestrating a coup within the White House?
Look, I think anybody close to the president who cares about him, and I hope she does, even though she's been absent, and obviously people wonder why she hasn't been there more. Yeah. But in that inner circle, I think there's great concern about the leaks, but specifically leaks coming from inside and the level of communication and defense of the president that comes from those who are closest to him. So that is not just, just the First Lady's concern. Yeah. That's a widespread concern.
Well, when she and Barron move into the White House this summer, I think you're going to see a different tone and a different tenor and a shift in the White House. And do you think that her protectiveness of her husband will have some sort of noticeable effect with those around her?
I actually hope those reports are true, because in my experience, nothing will get done faster if the wife is unhappy, especially on campaigns and in politics in general. I think it's easy to forget sometimes that Michelle Obama took a long time to become the great orator, First Lady, fashion icon that we know her to be today. She actually had a really rough start, lest we forget her saying, the huge gaffe of the first time I've been proud of my country was only when my husband was nominated for president. She had a lot of gaffes along the way. I don't know why we're not being more patient with Melania. She's growing into this role, clearly doing a good job. Yeah. I am very excited for her to move into the White House. I think it's symbolically very important for the rest
Well, she's getting rave reviews from the press over there, notably about that outfit, about which you just mentioned. The Arab News circulated a special English print edition for U.S. press, heaped praise on the First Lady, calling her outfits, specifically that black one we just showed as she walked off of the plane, classy and conservative, accompanied by a full-page color photo.
Yeah. So she's using all of the skills and all of the accessories, Harris.
Yeah.
Whether
I'm more interested in what she says and what she does.
I agree. I mean, it's not that fashion's not important, but come on.
She looks fabulous
she's a model.
all the time.
She's a model.
Okay,
I mean, she's
but she's going in just a little bit
she's got a full quiver.
to a hospital garden with Mrs. Netanyahu. That they are two strong women together on the ground with messaging from each of them. Fashion is great, but can we talk about what the First Lady is doing and saying? Can we pay attention to that history making today too? Just a question.
Hard break coming up.
All right, we're coming right back.